Do any of you guys, if you're Canadian, did they ever play this for you in school? Pep told me in his school they played this. They played this video.
Canadians, to before you had TV.
And it's just feeling ourselves from
hockey night
1812.
in Canada. There was no
Canadian
CBC.
Oh my God!
No CBC.
In 1812, Madison was
This
mad.
guy,
He was the
this is a video made
president,
from my
you
grade 11
know.
social studies.
Well, he thought he'd tell the British where they ought to go. He thought he'd invade Canada. He thought that he was tough. Instead,
You can even tell like the age of this video by like the image. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's literally just me burning down the White House. It's literally just that.
And we're the ones that did it. It burn, burn, burn.
It's literally just that.
It burn, burn, burn. And things were very.
They played this in school. I mean, okay, to be very blunt with you, from moving across countries, right, I feel like a lot of the time with most Western culture usually involves like disrespecting Americans or like ignoring them or thinking they're stupid in some way. Like that's always like the stereotype. I don't know, well, I do know why, but it's like, I feel like they really drive that into you in school, like through like the way like stuff is formed. I hope I'm not the only one that gets that vibe from Canadian like education. Honestly, there are some really good educational videos relating to the War of 1812. Oh, you know what also got added, released recently? They released a new Oversimplified. Oh my god, we actually may have to watch this because this one's about the First Punic War, and this is such a good topic. Like, no one ever talks about like the First Punic War. They always talk about the second, but the first is actually like, it's very important. It's so important.
Hey, Dad. Hi, son. Just reading the newspaper. What can I do for you? Well, I was just wondering, what makes us so great? How did we come to be? Wow, my son. Boy, let me take you on a journey to this side of the room.
Oh,
The story
okay. So let's see how this develops.
of Rome begins with these beautiful baby boys going to town on some she-wolf mommy milkers. That's gross. You're
That is actually true. Just like here's a very like brief historical reference. Historically, what happened was Romulus and Remus basically got dropped into Italy, like the center of Italy, like alone as kids. Historically, they would say that like this wolf of Rome. I forgot that's what they called her. I think it was literally they called her the she-wolf of Rome. Like essentially. Essentially nursed them to like adulthood, and so like the wolf is like a very like significant part of Roman culture as a result.
Sorry, son.
Yeah, it's
You're
actually like they
not
dropped
close.
from the Fortnite.
I love you.
The Fortnite.
They're called Romulus and Remus, and when they grew up in 753 BC, they founded Rome. But there was just one problem. They couldn't agree on which of them should be the king, but they worked it out peacefully, right? Oh, heavens
Thanks the
no.
driver now.
Romulus caved
Thanks
Remus's
the
skull in with a
police.
shovel. Here's a picture.
Our first king committed fratricide?
Oh, get used to it.
Look at his face. When's the part where we become the greatest civilization, Dad? Well, you see, at first Rome was full of men.
Actually, I really want to emphasize this to you. This war is actually the thing that really got me into Roman history. The First and Second Punic Wars are usually like most people's like first like introduction to like what made Rome kind of interesting from a historical point of view, like culturally. But I think the first is much
Real
more
sausage
important.
party. So we invited some neighboring cities over for a big feast, and then
Oh, yeah.
we literally
I will give you a small content warning, a very small content warning. Romans did a lot of kidnapping and other pretty bad things. So just a warning.
kidnapped all of their women. Here's a picture. Look at that one. She's like,
As you can see.
this
And
is
Romans
messed up.
did
You're
basically
messed
think
up.
like this,
Ugh.
by the way.
Sorry. I'll be a better father. I promise. So then, finally, after centuries of monarchy, those tyrannical kings started getting a little too big for their britches. So we overthrew the kings and established Rome as a republic. Is that when all the killing stopped? Oh, heavens no. That's when
when
the
they
killing
said-
surged.
I actually, I read
the
it.
Samnites, the Etruscans. Woo! What a rush. Dad, Rome seems pretty barbaric. You're barbaric! Oh, I forgot to tell you about the time a prophet told Saturn his son would one day overthrow him. So,
Oh, is he gonna show the
Saturn
picture of it?
literally
Please
ate
don't.
his own son seconds after he was born. I don't want to see a picture. Here's a picture. Dad! Look at that! That's messed up, man. Are we really this uncivilized?
That's
hey!
Roman
If
culture.
we were so uncivilized, would we use communal toilets where we all fart and poo together in one big stinky, steamy, dirty toilet room?
They did do this.
Yeah, Dad. We would. Clean your butt with a sponge, Timulus. But all these guys just used it.
You
What's
got it
wrong with your
good.
son, bro? I don't want to be Roman. This is so weird. You're weird. Sorry, you're not weird. I'm sure you're probably fine. The Roman Republic, a nation that, since its foundation, had been stabbing necks all the way down the Italian peninsula. But this isn't the famous Roman Empire that ruled the known world. Not yet,
Also,
anyway.
here's a little. You guys want me to?
But this
I'm gonna
isn't
hit
the
you with
famous Roman Empire that ruled
pet
the
peeve. So this is actually truly the biggest the Roman Empire ever got under Trajan, right? But like this was like very temporary. Like basically, it was never this big consistently. Like it was where my horn ends is where their border ends. Basically, they didn't take over much outside of like basically they controlled like a small area. Yeah, even in Egypt, they never controlled much down south. In fact, historically they thought that the tribes south of Egypt did not have heads. So they did not fuck with them. They're just like, I'm done. They just dead ass thought they just did not have heads. That is fucking crazy. So this is the Roman Empire under Trajan. Trajan was like the aggro Roman emperor. Like he basically, honestly, I think if he held out longer, he probably would have been able to conquer the what were they at the time? Parthians. I think they're the Parthians at the time. But like he was hella old. But like as soon as he died, almost all of this land like reset. Like the land across like the Danube, they literally just let the Danube go. They gave it up. They just walked away. Britain, like they basically just like stood there. Hadrian tried to go into Hadrian and Antius Pius tried to push north, but basically never did. Mesopotamia like basically was lost instantly after. Most of Egypt was, and I think that was it. Well, this would be like 117. Let's see if I'm right. Let's see if I can actually guess the time frame from the map. I am pretty good. I got it.
In 264 BC, the big daddy of the Western Mediterranean was Carthage. Let's rewind a bit. Carthage was founded in 814 BC when some Phoenicians in Tyre had a mega surplus of goods and decided to export those goods across the Mediterranean. They became the dominant trading power in the region, and to support their growing trade network, the Phoenicians established a number of colonies.
Greeks did this as well, by the way. This is actually how a lot of like, if you're familiar with the Bosporan Kingdom, which was in Crimea, they migrated towards there. There was the Massilians, which were basically like right outside of Spain, towards the north. Like they were in Gaul, practically.
Was Carthage.
Right.
Therefore, Carthage began its life as a Phoenician trade colony, and the Carthaginians were actually Phoenicians. Or, if you're a Latin-speaking Roman, they were Punic, hence the name of the video. Over the centuries, Carthage gradually expanded and became the region's base of power. Just like Rome, Carthage was a semi-democratic republic with its own senate and judiciary. But there were also some pretty hefty differences between the two. While Rome was big into farming and stabbing people in the neck, the Carthaginians, on the other hand, just like their Phoenician forefathers, had built their power through trade and navigating the waves. They went here and there, selling ivory tusks, gold, and slaves. And as a result,
also very
they
common.
were rolling in it. Whenever they weren't busy swimming around in their copious hoards of money, in their spare time, they also possibly enjoyed sacrificing their children to Baal, the god of... Let me just check my notes.
Fertility. Yeah, plant fertility. Close.
As a result of all their trading, Carthage had emerged as one of the Mediterranean's superpowers. But wait, they said, Rome?
Honestly, it probably was the superpower.
Well, I know it's a pretty obscure little country that you've probably never heard of. Initially,
how much of this is historical revisionism from Rome? So, like, the history of Rome with, like, basically when it comes to, like, Roman history, like, in 300 BC, Gaul basically, like, sacked Rome. As a result, they actually lost, like, most of their records from, like, their actual history. So, almost all of it was just, like, fabricated, pretty much, like in the Augustan era. Or like the Caesar era.
See, Rome had a thing where they liked to aggressively expand their boundaries.
Okay, I want to explain this to you too. This is a very interesting thing that the Romans like to do, and you may find it familiar in modern politics. What the Romans would do is they would never attack aggressively, ever. They would never attack like just straight up. But what they would do is they would be like, in 10 years or like 100 years, they're going to attack us. So we kill them now. So basically, they formatted it in a way where they're like, we're actually under attack, so we're just defending ourselves.
Often viewing such expansion as a defensive act. Kind of like when you kill your neighbor, because you knew eventually they would have tried to kill you first. Meanwhile, Carthage
it's literally
was
just like that. It was literally just like that. Like, that's like such a perfect way of putting it.
Wealthy trade network. So if you put a very strategically important island between them, well, 2 + 2 = war.
Wow.
Tensions rose, and the two sides began viewing
I like
each other
when he
with
does the eye,
increasing disdain.
like the eyes thing.
The
like
hard-working Romans looked across the water at the money-hungry Carthaginians and said, "Look at those dishonest crooks. Bet they've never done an honest day's work in their lives." And the Carthaginians looked back and said, "Look at those simple-minded brutes. Bet they've never sacrificed a baby in their lives." Yeah!
Oh, they
While
have.
war between the two superpowers seemed inevitable, the event that finally triggered it was a little unexpected. The whole thing began with a few simple mad lads on a wild night out.
Oh, yeah.
These mad lads are called the Mamertines.
Mamertines. I
They
actually
were
forgot about the
Italian
Mamertines.
mercenaries employed by the tyrant of Syracuse. Here. But when he died, his successor said, "Sorry, fellas, we don't need any big burly men with sharp sticks anymore. You can all go home." The Mamertines, as it turned out, didn't want to go home. So instead, they went to the nearby town of Messana and said, "Hey man, we are but poor little buff boys without a home. May we come in?" Aw, poor fellas. Sure thing.
Fella.
Just so long as you promise not to massacre all of us. We promise. The Mamertines then massacred all of them. Well, not all of them, just the men. And they stole their homes and families. Ha! This is my house now! Messana was now controlled by the Mamertines, and they began raiding up and down the Syracuse coastline. When the new ruler of Syracuse saw this, he wasn't happy. The Syracusans began fighting back, and in response, the Mamertines said, "Oh crap, they're fighting back? What do we do? Quick, we'll convince the Carthaginians to come and save us." Oh no! We're in trouble. So Carthage promptly answered the Mamertines' cry for help and sent a force to garrison Messana. As it turned out, however, some within the ranks of the Mamertines weren't too happy with the occupying Carthaginians, and they sent out a second cry for help to Rome. When it reached the Roman Senate, they were a little more
Come
hesitant.
and rub our bellies.
Going to
Love
help the Mamertines ran the risk of triggering an all-out war with Carthage, and they had only just finished conquering the Italian peninsula, so they were kind of tired. Plus, the Mamertines were all the way across the water. They had never made a leap like that before. So you would assume that to avoid any conflict with Carthage, the exhausted Romans would probably sit this one out.
Yeah, exactly. It is
But
kind of
you
like that. Right?
would assume wrong. Rome just couldn't
that's
resist a good chance for war. Why?
That's just what they
Well,
did.
there's something you gotta understand about Rome. See, as a republic, they were hell-bent on preventing any one man from ever gaining too much power. And so rather than having one leader, Rome had two, called consuls, who shared power. These consuls could also only serve for 1 year at a time before new consuls were elected. These measures to limit the powers of the consuls were noble, but had an interesting side effect. The consuls knew they had just
I assume this is like related to it, but how Roman culture worked was a lot of the old like nobility had this concept called dignitas, right? Dignitas was basically this like I almost call it like an aura or like a legacy or like a reputation kind of. Dignitas was basically that they believed that even if they were born into noble families, they would have to accomplish something major they had to prove it in some way. Yeah, they needed clout. So what they would do is they would work up the ladder. Basically, once they're a consul, they would work on getting as much glory for Rome versus for themselves, right? Consuls doing stuff like, especially war, was considered the biggest, like, or most accomplished, like, thing that you could do practically, right? Like expanding, like, Rome. So war, as a result, became like the best way of like proving your nobility. This system they created actually created like a very warlike system that incentivized them to just attack people, which is interesting.
1 year to try and gain as much glory and prestige as possible. something that was very important in Roman society. And the best way of gaining glory and prestige? Military victory.
Glory and prestige is a better way to put it, I guess.
The Roman political system
Prestige
basically
is
ended up
the best
encouraging these consuls to go out and be as aggressive. Consuls convinced the people to vote in favor of going to Messana. And in they went. Upon the arrival of the Romans, the Carthaginians in the city, amongst the confusion, were forced to leave. Now, in contrast to Roman aggression, the Carthaginian military had a slightly different philosophy.
Actually, Romans were the first to meet.
Listen up. If you want to grow up to be Carthaginian military leaders, there's a few things you have.
Here's another thing. So, like, because of how Romans were, they were like goers. Like, they were actually like Leo players. They would just go, go, go. But like most other empires or like kingdoms were very defensive. Like, think about at this time, most were very defensive, right? Especially this is the time when like, this is the post-pikeman era. Pikemen were considered like the god at the time. It was only in the Macedonian Wars did that like perspective ever change. And it was because Rome was like too aggressive.
Have to understand, if you fail to succeed on the battlefield, that's a crucifixion. Showing cowardice, that's a crucifixion. The Roman consuls were awarded for victory, and therefore tended to be aggressive go-getters. By contrast, the Carthaginians
I'm really good this episode, aren't I?
For failure, and so they tended to be more cautious and restrained. This dynamic is helpful for understanding some of the crazy things that happened during the Punic Wars.
is definitely
the Romans have crossed over to Messana, and now there was some red on the island. Hit that panic button. This turn of events was unacceptable to both Carthage and Syracuse, so the traditional enemies teamed up to kick the Romans off their island. They surrounded the city and said, "Hey, you jerks! This isn't your island! Come out of there at once!"
Okay, we're coming!
See, Phil, you just gotta speak with authority. That's what being an alpha male's all about. Hey, man. Oh, you brought your weapons and armor? No, I didn't mean... Oh, crap. Out the Roman legions came to engage the Carthaginians in battle, and they sent them packing. With the Battle of Messana, whether intended or not, by going to help the Mamertines, the two sides had just slipped into an all-out war. With the initial Roman victory, towns across Sicily, including Syracuse, began switching allegiance, because being a winner is more fun. But the Carthaginians weren't about to just give up that easily. In 262 BC, they began building up their forces at Agrigentum. So the Romans, being aggressive go-getters, aggressively go-got them. The Romans immediately
most like kingdoms and republics would just like stop, right? Like when this started, like they would just be like, okay, let's like ceasefire or like figure something out. Literally, Romans heard they were stacking like up, and they're like, let's get them. Okay, have you guys ever watched Nathan For You? That one episode of the guy that gets drunk and like breaks the antique shit? Do you know what I'm talking about? The guy, he gets really drunk and Nathan takes him to like a antique store and he just breaks shit. That's actually like, that dude is literally what the Romans were. they're at Agrigentum. They're like, let's go, dude.
Siege, hoping to starve out the Carthaginian garrison. However, because this was the first time Rome had been fighting outside the Italian peninsula, across the water, they struggled to supply their forces. And before long, the Romans were as starving as the Carthaginians they were besieging. They had to forage for food, leaving them open to ambush. And when Carthaginian reinforcements arrived, creating a double siege, things got really bad.
Oh yeah, this is my other favorite thing of history. When they developed, like, they would wall in each other, and they just keep walling in each other. I think the best like case of this is in the Caesarian Civil War. Pharsalus, that's it. So they built walls around themselves to the point where they could block off each other's supply lines when they're both at the water. This is like Caesar and Pompey's like formula, right? So look at this. They have an outpost outside of a city. They walled in each other to prevent them from getting to the city. And then they walled themselves in to get their own supply lines covered, while also being walled in by the the Caesarians. The Caesarians are red, the Pompeians are blue. So like, look at how long this fucking wall is. This is fucking crazy. And this is actually like something that really was smart. Like it was extremely smart from both sides. Because like the Caesarians were like super like stretched out because of how long the wall is, right? Whereas the Pompeians had a much shorter wall that covered themselves while also being like, essentially it allowed them to do much smaller, like forcing battles and shit. And I think it's specifically what got them out of this battle. I'm pretty certain Caesar loses. I think this is like the last loss that Caesar really has. But Pompey doesn't like push for it. If Pompey pushed, he probably would have lost here. Oh my god, I hate that. Hanzo last year said that their Romans were actually the first Fortnite pro players, and I fucking hate that. I fucking hate that. Anyways.
Buddies starved each other for months until nobody could take it anymore, and they all finally came out for battle, which Rome won. Here's the report from the recent siege at Agrigentum, sir.
We killed 30,000 while only suffering 7,000
right.
losses? That's amazing.
That's
We're the
actually
best.
that's the
Yes,
opposite.
sir. Whoops, those are the wrong way
Yeah.
around. What? We lost 30,000? We're the worst. But we won, right? Yes, sir. But we also got our asses kicked. Yes, sir. So are we the best or the worst? Yes, sir.
The Romans won
like
at
the
Agrigentum
clapping.
because they were aggressive go-getters, and they now began eyeing up the possibility of conquering the entire island. Sicily was an
It was
island.
hidden.
Islands are surrounded by water. A strong navy would be vital for supplying troops and winning the war. Here was Carthage's navy, and here was Rome's.
Wait, why is his
I
ass
think you
so
can
big?
see the problem.
Historians debate just how much naval experience Rome had at this point. Presumably,
So
they
they probably had like a small fleet for like covering their shoreline, because pirates were extremely common in the Mediterranean, especially like from Sicily and Sardinia and Corsica. But like the Romans actually had no real navy. Like probably outside of that was like nothing. Like it's not a matter of like, oh, did they have like some experience or like a lot? It was like, did they have literally nothing or like a tiny bit?
must have had something to defend their shoreline. But whatever it was, it would have paled in comparison to the Carthaginian juggernaut. And so Rome had to figure out exactly what to do about all this water.
Come on, men. We're not gonna let some pansy candy-ass water get in the way of our glorious victory against Carthage. Charge! We're gonna need a bigger boat. What's a boat? I don't know. If the Romans wanted to win this war and obtain Sicily, there was only one thing for them to do.
Let's
I guess we're just gonna have to go ahead and build ourselves a war fleet, aren't we? From scratch? From scratch. But we don't even know how.
Never mind how to fight with one. Don't worry, Hank.
We're up to the challenge.
And so, the Romans worked long and hard trying to figure out how on earth you actually build the latest style of warship. In the
I like the
end,
cherry.
They had a bit of luck on their side.
a Carthaginian
Hey, this is
quinquereme ended
super
up
lucky.
accidentally grounding on Italian
I forgot
soil.
about that.
The Romans found it and copied the design. While the new fleet
This is
was being
actually
built,
like something
the
that
Romans
actually
trained rowers
had a
on land.
huge
And
amount of
would you
impact on
believe
me.
it?
I'm not joking. What the Romans like to do, and this is so important, they would get washed by something and they just steal the fuck out of it and they make it better. So like almost all of what you know from like modern day warfare is like a vast majority of it is from Romans copying other people and just doing something. Like the Gladius was from like an Iberian tribe that specifically like had really good swords. So when the Romans attacked the tribe and like they ended up seeing like how good their swords were, they were like, we need this. This is ours.
The
Same with like
Romans put
javelins,
together
right? I think
a full
the
fighting fleet of
the
120 warships
Etruscans
in
used
just
javelins
2
before
months.
they attacked.
A staggering feat.
Or maybe it was the
Now, I know
same.
what you're
I don't
thinking,
remember. It was
but
one of them.
oversimplified.
But,
if the Romans
uh,
can build a war fleet from scratch in 2 months,
Oh yeah,
then why does
that
it
was
take-
also very important to you. They made a war fleet in 2 months. That shit is crazy. You know, a lot of people in fighting games have a lot of ego about stealing other things, right? Like they're like, oh, this is a good option. I don't want to do it because I didn't come up with it. The Romans stole everything across like the board from everyone, and everyone's like, oh, the Romans did it first.
From what I hear,
And I was
copied
like,
the
you know
design
what?
from us, sir.
Well,
Maybe it's
how
not
on
so
earth did they
bad
get the
after all.
blueprint, Carl?
The Romans also had another cultural, what was it called? Interpreto Romana, I think, right? Let me make sure. The idea was that they would correlate Greco-Roman deities to other ones, right? So here, I'll give you an example. So how this would work, they would essentially correlate what their god would do. So like you can see like here at the very top, right? The function would be agriculture. So they would correlate Adonis to each god and say like, oh, you're just like us. You mean you worship Adonis, right? And like they would just keep doing this. And this is actually how they Latinized a lot of cultures like in the area. It was honestly probably a reason why they were so successful for as long as they were.
A war fleet.
Just
so
because
now the
like
Romans have a navy. And it's time to put it.
They built so much around like essentially absorbing other cultures into them so fast. Like usually what would happen is like older generations would be like kind of like old fashioned, like they'd be like, let's say like Gallic, right? But then the new generation that would follow, they would almost always be like basically just Romans, like almost entirely.
But how does one wage
And there's a lot of
ancient
reasons for
naval
that,
warfare?
We'll
Easy.
save it.
All of the ships had giant bronze rams on the front.
True, they liked
so all
rams,
you had to
didn't they?
do was outmaneuver the enemy and give him the jimmies. Easy as
what?
pie. And so the aggressive Romans set out for some good old-fashioned jimmy giving. The consul,
Who's the Jimmy?
Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, set out for the town of Lipara, believing the garrison there wanted to join the Romans. As he entered the harbor, however,
He did
he
have
found
rams.
himself trapped
Though,
by a Carthaginian fleet. And in the
You'll see.
following skirmish, he was completely outmatched. The Romans may have had a brand new fleet, but when it came to engaging in actual combat, their inexperience showed. There was
They got fucking
just something
lost.
better about the Carthaginian
Fast.
ships. The Carthaginian rowers
Oh, they
had
do
nicer
have nice
abs.
abs.
The entire Carthaginian empire had been built on expert seamanship. So, when it came to water, the Carthaginians were better, and the Romans were
They're
wetter.
wetter.
In their initial skirmish, the Romans were beaten so badly that the consul, Scipio, was given a nickname,
Oh
Asina.
yeah, so this is a low-key another thing that really got me into Roman history. I once mentioned names. Names were like a very big factor, and this is actually one of them. So when you were a figure and you got a nickname like this was basically not only was one, it was almost like hereditary. Like if I won a war and I was Gallicus, right? If I had a kid, they would also be Gallicus, right? That's like the sort of thing, right? Or they could be inferred through that dignitas, right? Like that's the sort of thing how it worked. Yeah, your bloodline felt it. Like this guy actually got ratioed so hard, his dynasty felt it.
And if you're wondering what that means, just drop the Ina. So what were the Romans to do? How could they possibly stand up to this Carthaginian superpower? Well, there's something you gotta understand about the Romans. Back when they found that Carthaginian ship and copied its design, that wasn't a one-off thing.
Yeah, they
Copying
loved
their
stealing
enemies
their
was
shit.
as Roman as punishing murderers by sewing them into a leather pouch with a monkey, snake, and rooster, and then throwing them into a river, which is a thing they did.
It is actually a
Wait,
thing they did.
what was I talking about?
But it was
Oh,
it was
yeah.
not in general.
Copying their
it
enemies.
was
Many of the
for
most
very
famous
specific
Roman
crimes.
inventions were actually borrowed. Aqueducts, chariot racing, their gods. Even in warfare, the Romans would get pierced by a Sabine javelin, and they'd
Oh,
be like,
Sabines, I
wow.
see.
They'd get hacked to bits by an
Yeah.
Iberian sword, and they'd be like, wow. And they'd copy the designs for themselves. However, they wouldn't just copy it. They would advance it, finding ways to adapt it as perfectly as possible. And in
But
the
isn't this
case
like
of
it's kind of an interesting position, right? Because it's like they had such a nationalist perspective of themselves, like culturally, right? Like they viewed themselves as like essentially like liberating these like barbarians. Like that's literally how they viewed it. But then when they'd fight them, they would steal every single fucking thing they could, and they just feel like we're better now.
the Romans realized if they wanted to beat the Carthaginians at their own game, they would have to adapt. The Romans excelled at combat on land, not on water. But what if?
Yeah, so like
they
the
said,
problem that the Romans had, right, was that they had no naval experience, but the Carthaginians had like so much, right, across like hundreds of years. But as a result, Carthage's like offensive like military was not that great. It was actually kind of bad for a variety of reasons. If they ever were able to like, you know, nullify the fact that like, oh, we're fighting on boats like against each other, like ramming into each other, they would just win, like basically.
we could
the
somehow
Carthaginians were
turn a
not
sea
as good
battle
at direct
into
battles
a
as
land
much,
battle. Sounds
at least
crazy,
at this time.
right? Well, they made a couple of tweaks to their
what do they call
warship, and look, here they come again. They must love getting their asses kicked.
It's actually kind of cool.
Sir,
I actually really
what's
like
that toll thing
Yeah.
sticking out of their ships.
Look at that. It's actually kind of cool.
They really are
idiots.
I mean, how stupid can you be? Let's just add a big wooden tower to our ship that'll weigh us down and blow us over in the wind. I mean, what does that thing even do?
The Romans had built a big swinging spiked gangway
A
called the
corvus,
corvus. So when the Carthaginian ships approached to ram them, the Romans would just slam them. The Carthaginians tried going around. No problem. The corvus could swivel.
Even
Try
like
going-
this, like the fact that it would swivel is actually like smart as fuck. Like for what they're doing, I don't know. I'm kind of impressed by the hindsight.
behind, the Romans would huddle to the
I
coastline.
don't know. Is that just
It
me?
was foolproof.
I feel
Those
like if
big,
I was
sexy
in that position, I
Carthaginian
would
rowing
have
vessels
lost.
could flex all they want, but they
The
were no
swivel.
match for the Roman mind. So, ladies, you see, what really matters is what's on the inside. Please go out with me. And with that, the Romans, who had only just recently began dabbling in the art of
Okay.
naval combat, thanks to their ingenious corvus, had just managed to outclass the Mediterranean seafaring superpower. The Carthaginians were stunned, and the general in charge of the defeated Carthaginian fleet, well, you better believe that's
believe
a
it.
crucifixion. Their newfound control of the seas, the Romans could now more easily blockade coastal cities and supply their legions on land. Surely, the Romans were now free to unleash their aggression all over the island. To counter the new Roman supremacy, the Carthaginians decided to engage in a defensive war of attrition, forcing the Romans to engage in siege after lengthy siege. The war in Sicily
like the
became a
song.
long, hard, back and forth slug. One
Well,
by
I mean,
one,
they
cities
viewed it as
slowly
like
fell
if
as the
you
Romans gained
crucified
ground.
someone for
Occasionally,
failing,
the Carthaginians
then they would just
countered
not
and
fail.
even pushed them
They
back,
would just not
only
fail
for the Romans
harder.
to rebound again.
That was-
and
that was
whenever a
basically how they
city
viewed
did
it.
finally fall, the Romans could delight in slaughtering the entire population and selling any survivors
But in the
into
context
slavery,
of like fighting
which was
like
pretty
the
standard procedure
Romans,
at
it
the
was
time.
incredibly
In
stupid.
general, the campaign on land was
Though,
progressing much slower than the Romans had hoped.
Even though like what I just said with the Carthaginian military was like not as great directly, the thing about it was like they still probably had one of the best generals at the
And
time.
quite frankly, they were getting sick of it. So in 256 BC, they decided that something had to change. Hey everyone, my name's Marcus Attilius Regulus,
This
and
guy
I'll
is
be one of
important.
your consuls for this year. Look, as I'm sure you all know, Sicily's being a bit of a drag. Sure, I could go and spend my entire year as consul besieging one single city.
But do you
but
ever
they'll
live in a
never make
city
a
back
naked
then if that's
statue of me
what
for
would
that.
happen? Because
So here's
if
the
you
new
lived
plan.
outside the
I'm
city,
gonna
you'd get
skip Sicily
you'd have
entirely,
like bandits and
take
shit
my
fucking
army,
with you.
and go right for the heart of Carthage itself. I'll slaughter the men, enslave all the women and children, and when I return, you'll all build 1,000 naked statues of me.
This is
Marcus,
basically how they
that
thought about it.
Women and children stuff. That seems pretty evil and barbaric. No, Jim, it's perfectly normal in the ancient world. Sometimes we even chop their pets in half.
Also
Okay,
true,
guys,
unfortunately.
looks like the Romans are coming straight for us this time. And what will they do when they get here? They'll kill us all. They'll massacre each and every last one of us. They may even chop our pets in half. That's barbaric! No, Rob, it's actually pretty normal for the time. We'd do the same to them. Who'll protect us? Funny you should ask, Mary. That's kind of why I called this meeting. Who will protect us? You guys? Ha! Don't make me laugh. Why, you're just a bunch of stupid and weak farmers. Simple-minded buffoons. Cowards. Fools. If the Romans manage to land on African soil, we're all gonna die. A
Thanks,
terrifying,
that's the so Gavin.
hideous, unspeakably painful death. Is
This
that the end
basically
of that
happened, by the
speech?
way.
Yes.
This might as well have happened.
The Carthaginians had to stop the Romans from ever landing in Africa because they believed that would be the end. So as the Romans were building an invasion fleet, the size of which the world had never seen before, the Carthaginians were preparing an even bigger one to stop them. And in 256 BC, as the Roman invasion fleet made its way south, The stage was set
think this
for a
is the biggest-
humongous battle that saw
biggest,
680
battle in
warships,
history,
around
right?
300,000 men,
It's one of them.
fighting to decide the course of the war.
Naval battle.
To this day, the Battle of Cape Agnomus remains possibly the largest
it's
naval
the
battle
largest.
in human history.
I knew it was,
all
I
the
knew
way
it was
back
one of them.
in ancient
but not
times.
the largest.
The Romans had a lot riding on this battle. They weren't just sending their warships, but transports as well, full of supplies and horses for their invasion of Africa. They therefore formed a protective wedge-like formation to punch through the long, thin Carthaginian line. The Carthaginian generals, however,
Wow, they had all the
desperate
resources
to
needed.
prevent
I'm
the
actually
Romans
glad
from
you
reaching
brought that up,
Africa,
because that's
had
a very
plan of
important
their own. As
factor
the Roman fleet
for
approached,
them.
the Carthaginian center feigned a
This shit is
retreat,
so
luring
good.
the Romans in so their outstretched flanks could envelop them and
This
get
shit
around
is
the Roman
awesome.
corvus. A clever plan. But with such a huge battle and so many ships crowded together, the Carthaginians struggled to maneuver.
There's a
as
reason why they don't
and
have
in the chaos,
they don't do this
three
the same way
separate
anymore.
battles emerged
Except for
across the
Romans.
huge battle space. With the number of ships limiting their ability to maneuver,
This
the
is probably why there hasn't
Carthaginians
been a battle
became
as
sitting
big.
ducks, and all the Romans had to do was start swinging. The Roman center came out on top and were then able to turn around and rescue their pinned down flanks. The Battle of Cape Agnomus was a Roman victory.
That's huge too. Well, part 2. That's actually
Romans
a pretty
were-
good video. I'm actually really
After
impressed
the
by it.
gigantic battle at Cape Agnomus, the Romans were now
This
free
is
to
a
land
little
on
louder.
African soil. And so, they did. The Carthaginians chose to focus on defending the city of Carthage itself. So the Romans immediately took the city of Aspis and were then free to raid and plunder the countryside. They took over 20,000 slaves and a ton of booty. But then, some orders arrived from the Senate. Send home the booty. So the
Great
other
comic
consul
book,
left
yeah.
with the booty, leaving Regulus and his forces on their own. And they began advancing towards Carthage. Along the way, according to the ancient writer Livy, they encountered a literal dragon. Now, Livy was a Roman historian, so his account may be slightly exaggerated. But this, I believe. As the Romans continued to plunder, the
Yeah,
Carthaginian
that reminds
people
me. I've told this story as a like a history story before. I love and like there's a story in history where the Romans were sieging a Pontus during the I think the Second Punic War or Second Mithridatic War. They said that like during like a siege that the Pontic forces reportedly like would throw bears into tunnels. They would have tunnel bears.
flooded into the city. Now, not only was it in a major panic, but it was so crowded, the people began to starve.
Don't panic, everyone!
Look,
Yeah, tunnel
I know
bears.
you're all starving, but I still have food for me. So, you know, it's not all bad.
You're wasting your tomatoes! And you idiots wonder why you're
Well, pretty good
starving!
eating good.
Oh well, it's just more food for me! Nom, 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 nom.
Oh, I wish I could do that. Like if you could
Things
just like
weren't looking good for
I don't
Carthage.
know, maybe that would be that
They had
good
to
if you
do
could-
something
could
to
catch
stop the Romans
tomato like
rampaging
that.
throughout their land. So they decided, finally, it was time to put an end to it. They headed out and set up on rough, hilly terrain overlooking
Not
the
smart,
Roman
by the
camp.
way. This is
and
actually
they
not what you
prepared
do.
for battle. Now, while the Carthaginians were the traditional masters of the sea, on land, they weren't always the brightest. Case in point, setting up in this position overlooking the Roman camp was just about the stupidest thing they could have done. Why? Well, there's something you gotta understand about Carthage. The Carthaginian land forces actually suffered from a multitude of different issues. First
The
of
main
all,
one was
since the
mercenaries.
Carthaginians were
Because
rich,
they had so
rich,
much
rich,
money.
they
They'd buy a bunch of mercenaries, but since like they had so many different cultures,
People
like,
have-
communication or like a strategy would be difficult.
could afford to pay a huge number of foreign mercenaries to fight for them. These mercenaries actually made up the vast majority of Carthage's forces, and therefore, Carthage's land armies were a melting pot of many different cultures. This, however, meant that if a battle wasn't going their way, there could be loyalty issues. Man, I ain't getting paid enough for this. You Balearic slingers better not be thinking of running away. What did he say? I don't know, man. I don't speak Phoenician. Let's get out of here. Clearly, there were also language issues. The military generals tended to be Carthaginian, but they made a lot of strange decisions. For example, one of the most feared assets of the Carthaginian army were the war elephants. To
You
a
actually
Roman
have no
soldier
idea,
who had
yeah,
never
like-
even seen an elephant before.
Like, to Romans, like, they wrote about what they thought the first time they saw elephants, and they literally were like, they're like demons. Like, they actually thought they were like demons, like actual demons coming to kill them.
This was like fist fighting, a literal monster. Yet the Carthaginians continually kept placing the elephants in the rear, where they were no use. In a similar fashion, the neighboring region of Numidia provided Carthage with the most skilled cavalrymen in the world. But the Carthaginians often chose to fight on rough,
It would be
uneven
very
terrain,
scary.
where horses and elephants were less effective.
Yeah, like
And
just
so,
imagine
in this
you
case-
are just in the field, you are in like a place you have no idea where anything is, and you just see an elephant fucking running at you, just like charging at you, and you are just standing there. And even worse, you're expected to just hold your fucking ground. You are expected to like basically go in there and just fight it anyway. A lot of Roman formations were basically built on like the most inexperienced fighters being like they'd go in first, and then they just like let the good and strong soldiers just like clean up basically. So their most experienced soldiers were always like pretty good. But then when they would send the elephants in first, right? Like the first time, and then the elephants would just like run through them because they had nothing, and then they're just scared as fuck. Yeah, they're fodder.
When the Carthaginians again chose the rough terrain near the Roman camp,
So, like,
the
there's no
Romans
point.
easily sent
Yeah,
them
they just, like,
packing.
there's nothing to be afraid of.
Wow, Regulus. We're mere miles from Carthage. You sure are amazing. Yes, Steve. I know. Everything was looking up for Regulus. A Roman victory seemed like it was only a matter of time. But then,
how happy
Regulus
the Romans
realized
are.
something. He had been consul for almost a year, and his term was coming to an end. He knew that if his successor took over and he finished the job, he would get the naked statues, not Regulus.
No, this is actually a very important thing in history, and I really want to drive this home. There's like a theory with history, right, where it's like the great men of history theory, right, where it's like the one guy just like carries everything, which like it's not real, like it doesn't exist. Even like Caesar, who's considered like, you know, one of the better commanders, what made him good was that he essentially used a lot of like other generals and just like let them do their thing, and he focused on like the main like battle plan, right? The main thing. This system was actually terrible, and it's actually something that ruined the Roman Republic. Let's say you and I were like meant to like do a job, right? You do 99.9% of it. If I take office and I finish it, it goes to me. All of it. This was something that they did in almost everything, even in military. Like military, the thing that actually led to the fall of Rome was like, I believe it was 80, was Sulla. Sulla was basically a military commander who fought in the Jugurthine War, I think. I believe that was the name. And he basically single-handedly like won the war, like as a soldier. Like he single-handedly did it. But because Rome had this system, he got zero credit. He got like literally zero credit. It all went to his like commanding officer, because that's how it worked. You did not get any credit for your own accomplishment. It all went to your like the leader. That was basically a big thing that led to a lot of like resentment and like animosity, and it led to Sulla marching on Rome for the first time, which in turn led to Caesar marching on Rome, which essentially led us to the empire. So
There was no way Regulus
even in
was
like the
going
second
to allow
or the
that.
First Punic War, you
So
can
he
see
jumped
like
the
elements of
gun.
the system kind of
You there,
like fucking over their
Carthaginian
system.
boy.
I want you to deliver a message to your elders.
I, Marcus
like, he's like-
Attilius
they're, like, actually
Regulus,
about to win
demand
this
the
war.
total and unconditional
And he's just
surrender
forcing
of
for a
Carthage.
surrender. Right?
Unconditional surrender? Jeez, at least lay siege and starve
Yeah,
us all
it's
to
same
death
joke, but
first.
all
Just
cast
deliver the
politics.
message,
That's actually it.
Punk.
He demands your total surrender. What? Jeez, at least lay siege and starve us all to death first. Hey, that's what I said. Well, boys, this Roman thinks we're out.
But we're not out, are we, boys? No.
We'll do what we always do in times like this. Hire somebody else to solve our problems for us. Darren, bring in the Spartan. Regulus's overly harsh demands had the unintended effect of reinvigorating Carthaginian resolve. They brought in a mercenary from the famed land of Sparta named Xanthippus to help dig them out of this situation. And we all know what Spartans are like. Xanthippus showed
love
up
that
and
movie.
immediately took charge. He had a look around and said, "You idiots, put the elephants in front of the army so they can smash into the Romans. And stop fighting on rough, uneven terrain. Find a big flat field so your superior cavalry can do their job. And what's this I hear about you giving a speech telling everyone they're gonna die? Hey, I was just telling the people the truth. You're a politician. Lie to the people." And so Xanthippus led out the newly reformed Carthaginian army to meet Regulus in the Battle of the Bagridas River. The elephants, now in the front, smashed into the Roman lines, causing disarray. The cavalry, with total freedom of movement,
like, easy to
outflanked the Roman infantry. Thanks to this impressive Spartan, the battle was a total Carthaginian victory. And Xanthippus, for his stunning victory, was forced to flee Carthage because the leadership got jealous.
Also very common thing. Since like this sort of thing would happen a lot if they called in like a mercenary or like someone's like a subordinate got too successful. So like here's a good example. In the end of the Roman Empire, when Caesar took over, or sorry, when it was about to start, or the end of the Roman Republic, Caesar took over Gaul. Mark Antony had taken over most of the East. So the third triumvirate member, Crassus, he tried to take over the Parthians, right? And the Parthians were basically like the Persian Empire. It's a little more complicated, but just to summarize. He went on a war into Parthia and just like got smoked by the Parthians. And this one general just like completely destroyed not only Crassus, who was considered like the richest guy in the world at the time, but also like one of the like a complete stomp of Rome, to where like they lost one of their standards, and it was like a huge deal for them. A battle standard being lost in war was like there was like no bigger insult to them, right? That was like such a huge deal that like the Parthian general got a bunch of like prestige. I forgot his name. Basically, after he won the war for Parthia, the Parthian king killed him because he was too good. That was how it used to work, because they'd be like, well, they could just overthrow me. Right?
During the battle. Legend has it, he was brought before the Carthaginian council, and they made a proposition. Well, Reggie, not looking so good anymore, is it? Looks like we beat you pretty bad, huh?
Up yours, you Punic pansies!
Now, Regulus, nobody likes a sore loser, do they? No. How about this?
True,
We're gonna
that is
send
very
you
true.
back to Rome, and you convince the Roman Senate to surrender to us. If you fail, though, you
know,
gotta
I've
come
been thinking
back.
about this recently a lot. I've noticed this more since like Strive came out. If someone has like even a mildly positive response over like maybe a bad tournament experience, like a bad set or stuff like that, I think 10 times higher of them off that one interaction just like that after.
So we can
After
torture
being
you to death.
exposed to Strive Twitter for so long,
You
I'm like, this person is pure of
I
heart.
promise.
Hey guys. Whoa, Regulus. We
Pierce-
thought you got
Pierce
captured.
Was,
I did, but they sent me
Was
back to
Epirus.
convince you to surrender. Well,
I think
should
it's
we?
a pirate.
Surrender?
I feel like I
No,
want to always say a pirate.
Never
I feel
surrender.
like it's not right.
Give them hell, boys. They're at the end of their
Probably
rope.
Epirus. Doesn't
Anyway,
matter. The
I
point
gotta
is-
go be tortured to death now.
The
What?
point is,
Yep, part of a deal I made.
You never break a promise. That's too far.
And so, Regulus went back to Carthage and was tortured to death. And for keeping his promise, he was immortalized as the leading symbol of Roman virtue. Meanwhile, after their defeat in Africa, the remaining Roman survivors,
He got
still
a-
in
he got a
Africa,
statue,
were
though. He
still in
wanted the
Africa,
statue.
and they needed to be rescued. So the Romans sent their fleet to pick him up and bring him home. They successfully
Exactly.
fended
They
off
get
the
a statue.
Carthaginian fleet, grabbed the survivors, and made their way to Sicily. A great success. But then, things took a turn for the worse. Sir? That cloud looks kind of angry. Fear not, coward. Come on, guys. Laugh at Mother Nature with me. Ha ha!
Get used to this.
284 ships. Nearly 80% of the Roman fleet was destroyed. As many as
This-
100,000.
I know this is gonna sound crazy, but this is the point where I was really impressed by them. This is
men
where
drowned
this is where it gets
in
a little
a terrifying
intriguing.
act of nature. Never before
They lost
had Rome
100,000
lost
men,
so
just
many
like-
men in
like
a single
just
incident.
like that.
100,000 casualties for any other nation would be crippling.
Yeah,
Any other nation would hastily sue for peace.
That's like their
Any
whole
other
army.
nation would spend decades trying to recover. But Rome was not just any other nation. Infamous for its unrelenting determination in the face of overwhelming odds, Rome said, well, I guess we'll just
For
have to build
comparison,
another...
probably at the time, Rome must have been like 400,000, 500,000. So like they're probably in the millions, but like short millions. So like for soldiers, that's pretty bad.
Fleet.
And especially back then, the military system did not work the same way. The thing about it is, even though the population, like it could have been like, 20 million. I mean, maybe not 20 million, but like, 10 million, like 5 to 10 million, maybe. That's like generous, right? The thing about it was that you could not just enter military service. You had to pay for your own equipment as a soldier. This was something that changed in the Marian Reforms, I think. I believe it was the Marian Reforms, which was about 100 years later. By the way, Marian is the guy I was talking about earlier who took credit for Sulla's for his thing. The thing about it was, if you were a very wealthy like nobleman, you would be able to buy all your armor, everything, and you would be an elite unit. If you were poor and you could barely afford anything, you basically would, you were basically frontline and you were probably about to die. So that was the Roman system.
And they did. In just 3 months, they built 220 more ships. An astonishing feat.
That is
The
fucking
Romans
crazy,
sent
by
out
the
their
way.
brand spanking new war fleet. And
3 months. And they do it again.
they got caught in another storm. This time, a whole nother fleet was lost. And still, the Romans
And they
did not give
still
up.
kept going.
The Carthaginians couldn't believe it. Their enemy had just lost hundreds of thousands of men, had 2 fleets almost entirely destroyed, and they still wouldn't surrender. As one Roman poet put it, the victor is not victorious if
until
the vanquished does not consider himself.
Yeah, I love
so.
that.
In typical Roman
I
fashion,
fucking love that.
after a short break, they were once again building another fleet. However, for now, after all the disasters at sea, the focus began shifting back to the land campaign in Sicily. The Carthaginians, overconfident from recent successes, attempted to retake Panormus, but the Romans countered the terrifying war
was
elephants
the
by
defeated-
throwing
or
stuff
was
at
it?
them, scaring them away. Having stopped the Carthaginian advance, the road was now open to the final Carthaginian stronghold on the island, Lilybaeum. Lilybaeum was an extremely well-fortified city. In 250 BC, the Romans laid
Lilybaeum.
siege. The Carthaginian defense, however, was fierce, and skilled blockade runners kept the city supplied. Progress was so slow that the siege would last another 9 years.
Holy shit, I
To
knew it was
make matters
9 years.
worse, the
Holy
Carthaginians'
fuck. I knew it was
greatest
long,
military
but I didn't know it was
general of the
9
time,
years. Oh,
a man
here's
named
someone important.
Hamilcar Barca, to the island. He engaged in a skillful campaign of guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines, and for the remainder of the war, he was a major thorn in the Roman side. For now, with the deadlocked siege at Lilybaeum and the new Roman fleet at sea, things seemed to be at a standstill, and the Romans had to do something to break the deadlock. Thankfully, the Roman consul, Clodius Pulcher, had an idea. He tried to get things moving by attacking the Carthaginian fleet at Drepana. Now, before a battle, to predict if they would win, it was common for the Romans to look for signs from the gods. This could mean observing the weather or inspecting some cow livers. You
Yeah,
know,
they did all
typical religion stuff. In this case, Pulcher reportedly tried to feed some sacred chickens, but unfortunately for him, they wouldn't eat a crumb.
Uh-oh, the
A
chicken.
very bad sign. Well, he said, if they won't eat, then let them drink, stupid chickens! We'll observe the weather instead. Gods, give me a sign.
Let them
Ignore that.
drink, 'cause that's
Okay,
the kind of
how
battle
about
I will
this?
lie.
If I can get this piece of paper into that trash basket, we'll win. Ignore the signs from the gods. And in the following battle, the superior Carthaginians tore them to shreds. It also didn't help that by now the Romans had removed the corvus to stabilize their ships. And without their secret weapon, it was a disaster. And Pulcher was
Secret weapon,
disgraced.
uh-oh. Pulcher.
To make matters worse, the victorious Carthaginian fleet then went on to intercept a Roman supply fleet on its way to Lilybaeum. As they approached, however, they saw the signs of an incoming storm, so they took shelter. The
yeah,
Romans,
that's a trend.
on the other hand, said, "Onward, men! Set sail! We've got to deliver these supplies stat!" But sir, those clouds,
It was because their
don't you think
ships
we
were
ought to have
really
learned our
unstable
lesson by now?
without
Yes,
with the
Brian,
corvus on it.
we ought to have, but we haven't. Another fleet and 50,000 men lost in another storm. Disaster. Now, at this point, there still really isn't a clear winner. Sure, the
can see what I mean
Romans
by
have
I said
captured
Romans
most of
are the
Sicily
goers.
and cornered the Carthaginian land forces at Lilybaeum. But the continued disasters at sea were critically depleting their resources. And without a strong fleet,
Rome deserves
Rome
to lose
could
at this
not
point.
win. Meanwhile, Hamilcar Barca was still knocking about and creating even more problems. So, where do we go from here? How does this war finally end? By now, the two sides had been fighting for 23 years. They were exhausted. Their money, their resources, their strength were all utterly
Rhino Tree,
spent.
it's his Rome.
The Carthaginians
Rome
in
was always
particular
very
were
greedy.
eager to see the war end so they could get back
for,
to
like-
trading
like
and
gains
making money.
because of,
So after the
prestige,
latest
basically.
Roman disaster at sea, they said, look, there ain't no way in heck the Romans can come back again. They can't possibly
That would
afford
actually
to
be a
build
good
another
Assassin's
fleet.
Creed game
They're
because of who
done.
he is.
That's it.
Yeah, it's
Recall
all
the
on-
Navy,
it's all
repurpose
honor
them as
system
merchent
shit.
ships, and let's get back to making some money. Assuming the Romans would soon make peace, an anti-war faction within the government recalled a large portion of the navy, leaving Hamilcar on his own. The victors appeared to be declaring themselves victorious. Meanwhile, the vanquished were getting ready for round 5.
Round
The Romans
5.
built another fleet, this time heavily relying on patriotic donations from the upper classes to afford it. And once again, they put to sea. Sir? The Romans have built another fleet. Oh, for goodness sake, Clarence, can't you see I'm busy rolling around in this pile of money? But sir...
I don't care anymore, Clarence. I just don't care.
The Carthaginian politicians made a fairly lackluster final effort with a poorly built fleet to supply their forces in Sicily. But when the brand new Roman fleet caught them at the Battle of the Aegates,
And
even
the
without
glass
their
shattered.
signature corvus, they dealt them the final blow. And that was that. 23 years of war. Neither side could afford to keep fighting, but the Romans showed that they intended to anyway. The Carthaginians had no choice but to throw in the towel. The war had been long and hard for both sides, but in the end, it was Roman determination that won the fight. The Romans had spent the entire war trying to find a way to deliver
That
the knockout
actually was
blow.
just their formula.
They learned how to build a fleet and engage in naval combat. They developed ingenious new ways of waging war. They attempted an invasion of the Carthaginian heartland, and whenever disasters struck them, they always came back, again and again. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, spent the entire war watching whatever Rome did, and then figuring out how to respond. They were much more passive, and so, it's no wonder then that when both sides were close to collapse, Rome was the one who figured out how to go that little bit further. In 241 BC, the Carthaginian politicians sent word to Hamilcar Barca that he was on his own and could choose to make peace with the Romans if he wished.
If he wished.
Hamilcar was stunned. He felt betrayed by the politicians. Some sources say he refused to even negotiate. Nevertheless, terms had to be drawn up. Well, Hammy, I'm glad you Carthaginians have finally come to your senses and recognized who the true winner is. How many fleets did you lose? Okay, here are our terms. You leave Sicily to us and return all of our prisoners. You're not allowed to make war against Syracuse or her allies, and you have to pay us 2,200 talents of silver over the next 20 years. What's a talent of silver? Well, to put it in perspective, in the year 2022, that'll be worth around, let's say, 40 million US dollars.
Now, I want to emphasize this to you guys. Modern day conversion to like this is like super like shoddy, right? Like it's like it's basically not even really worth considering. The point is, it would basically bankrupt us.
Ay, caramba! That will cripple us.
Yeah.
Wow, we got a real smart guy over here. Yeah, that's kind of the point, you dingus. Ugh, I guess I have no choice. I accept.
Great.
Oh, by the way, we changed our minds. You actually have to pay us 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years. Thanks for accepting.
Dude!
See you later.
Hey!
The treaty was extremely punishing, and by switching up the terms at the last minute, they enraged the Carthaginians.
Jesus.
But still, one of the longest and deadliest wars at the time was finally over. The Romans had won. They achieved their aim of gaining Sicily. And even though it wasn't part of the peace deal, they took advantage of a weakened Carthage and grabbed Corsica and
Yeah, they
Sardinia as
took it.
well. Roman expansion beyond the Italian peninsula had just begun. The Romans hoped that now the Carthaginians would forever be under their thumb. Unfortunately, the harsh terms they placed on the Carthaginians at the end of the war left a growing anger, one that would come back to haunt them. One day, Carthage will have its revenge. That's nice, dear. I'm serious, woman. Maybe not in my lifetime, but perhaps in his. My beautiful son. You are born into a momentous destiny. You shall be Rome's greatest enemy. You'll tear Rome limb from limb. You'll burn their pathetic city into the ground. You'll slaughter their people, men, women, and children. My child, you are vengeance. Stop telling our baby he's vengeance. But he is, Barbara. He's vengeance. That may be so someday, but for now, our son has a name, and you should call him that instead. His name is...
That was a really good video. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed by it. So like small things to kind of like note. Like a lot of that, like the thing that I think is really interesting, they'll probably cover it probably cover it in the next one. But basically Hannibal actually, like Hamilcar made his son take an oath to basically like destroy Rome, basically. Like he pretty much built up Hannibal just to be like the #1 Rome hater, which is kind of OD. Just like actually being like, you gotta dedicate your life to just destroying this group. Like you are just a hater. Yeah, he did a really good job. In fact, a lot of people don't know, but Hannibal could have easily, and I mean easily, won the Second Punic War early enough. But like he just wasn't aggressive enough. Like that's the reason. Even in like history, you can hear a lot like people failing or like not accomplishing as much by like being too afraid of being aggressive or passive. I didn't say he lost. I just said he could have won very early. He lost. Question mark. Are you serious? This dude, he lost?